Can you start the recording? Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Great to be with you this morning. Let me turn on my video for just a second. I'm Jody Versaw, and I'm going to be kind of your MC for this morning's training. So today we're going to be spending several hours talking about high quality evidence for adult diploma portfolios. This training is a part 2 training. So we had the first part in September. That was Adult Diploma 101, kind of nuts and bolts for brand new programs and staff. So I know many of you were at that training, and I know there's some of you here today who were not at that training, which is also okay. But just so you know, we will be referencing that and kind of reviewing some of the things that we learned at that training. So this is a part 2. Let's see. So here is the plan for what we are going to do today. We'll start with some introductions. We will do an overview of the standard adult diploma, just a very quick review of everything that we learned and all the pieces that we talked about when we did the first part of this training in September. We will talk about the portfolio submission and review process so that you have a sense of the logistics of how that works. And we will spend the bulk of our time today really diving into what does high quality evidence look like for this portfolio. And we'll kind of do that, we'll tackle it in chunks. So what does high quality evidence look like when we're talking about adult education instruction as the completion option? We're going to start there because that's the deepest, kind of biggest, most onerous task, but we'll also talk about what high quality evidence looks like when you use high school credits as the completion option and what it looks like when you use assessments, which is most often the GED test. So I want you to know that there are a number, actually quite a few materials, documents for today's training, and we have organized those for you in a Google folder, a Google Drive folder. I'm wondering if one of my, Lindsay or Christine or Astrid, somebody, if you can stick this link in the chat. So for those of you who were at the training, at the Adult Diploma 101 training in September, we started a folder then, and we have added the materials for today into that same folder because we do want you to have access to all of the things that you had access to when we were together in September. But we also have a bunch more documents that we're going to talk about today. So thank you, Astrid, for putting that link into the chat. That link may be, yeah, there's a higher level folder that has 2 folders inside of it, one from September's training and one from today's training. I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay. Right. So Astrid put both of those links in the chat. I am kind of pausing here a little bit because I do want to make sure that you all have clicked into that folder and that you see those materials there. Throughout the morning this morning, we will be talking about a number of different documents that are there. So can you please give me a thumbs up or a got it or some kind of acknowledgement in the chat that you can see that folder, that you maybe click into a document or 2 and make sure that you can, yeah, that things are accessible there. I'm going to pause here until I hear from enough of you to feel confident that we've got all the sharing settings right and everything. Okay, great. Thank you to those of you who are confirming. Thumbs up. All right. So I do encourage you this morning, as we're working through lots of information, to have a tab open in your browser with that folder, and we will be looking at different documents in there throughout the morning. Great. All right. Looks like people are reporting that they've gotten there. So I'm going to keep going. Let us know if you do have any troubles. All right. And then just wanted to give you the heads up because it's good to know kind of from the get-go. We are planning sort of in the middle of our workshop today to do a little time debriefing, thinking in small groups, in breakout rooms. So we just want you to be ready and prepared that that's coming. And we do encourage, if you can, if it's possible for you to turn on your camera and unmute yourself when you have a chance to share in your groups. So just an FYI to be ready for that sort of in the middle. Yep, giving you time to brush your hair, Christy. All right, good. We're going to get started this morning with some introductions with who is in the room, who you're going to be hearing from this morning. So first of all, just want to be clear that there are a number of us on the adult education team at the Minnesota Department of Education who are involved with the adult diploma and who help to oversee this project. I'm Jody. I am the program quality specialist on the team, and there are several of my colleagues who are here in the room today offering support. We're not going to hear from them in the presentation today, but they're in the room and present for this work. So I'm going to invite my colleagues to turn on your camera and introduce yourself. I know Brad is here, so maybe I'll kick it off to Brad next.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. Good to see everyone here virtually today. Brad Haskamp, State Adult Education Director with the Minnesota Department of Education. And just excited to see a new group coming on board with the Standard Adult Diploma. So thank you for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Brandy.
Good morning. My name is Brandy Logan, and I am one of the newest members over at the Department of Ed. I am the High School Equivalency and Accountability Specialist, and also working with Jody in maintaining and reviewing portfolios. Kick it over to Astrid.
Thanks, Brandy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Astrid Leiden, and I'm the Professional Development Specialist on our Adult Education team. Excited to be with you all here today.
All right, thank you to my MDE colleagues. And then we have a couple other folks that have done a lot of work and are going to help us do a lot of the heavy lifting today in terms of this presentation. So my two colleagues from Atlas, Christine and Lindsay, our voices you're going to be hearing a lot from today. But would the two of you just come on and introduce yourselves quickly? Maybe we can start with Christine.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Kelly, and I'm the Atlas Literacy Coordinator and have been with the Diploma since almost the beginning. And I'm just really excited because some of us who are on this call were there in the beginning and we didn't have any of this. So it's so cool to see how much has developed, and really it is kudos to everyone who submitted portfolios and helped us learn, and to our portfolio reviewers and our MDE team. We're really excited to have this content today. So welcome.
And I'm Lindsay Poost, and I also work with Atlas as the numeracy and special projects coordinator. And I am newer to adult diploma, but I am I'm excited to get to learn more and dive in. So welcome.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I'm super grateful for Christine and Lindsay for putting in a lot of hard work, much of it at the last minute to get all of this content ready for you all today. We also have folks from Literacy Action Network, or LAN, who have been supporting this adult diploma work for years now. Wendy Herr is the coordinator at LAN, who does a lot of the portfolio review kind of logistics and reviewer assignments. Wendy isn't with us today, but we're grateful that Carla is able to be tech hosting and giving us that support. So again, just a side note, if you have any tech troubles, go ahead and reach out to Carla. I'm really grateful for Carla to be here today. Then I want to give a very big shout out to the diploma review team. So these folks, these 6 people are adult education practitioners who work across the state of Minnesota in different settings, and who are the reviewers who have their eyes on every single piece of evidence that is submitted in every single domain and portfolio that gets submitted for review. At this point, this adult diploma project would not be possible without this group of people. It used to be a couple years back, it was me and Brad who did all of the reviews, and with the volume of portfolios that we have being submitted now, that is absolutely not sustainable anymore. So I am so grateful for this group of people who really put a lot of thought and effort and ask good questions and give good feedback and make good recommendations as they are looking at portfolios. I want to just take a moment to recognize that there is no review robot. There is no machine. There is no algorithm. These portfolios are reviewed by humans, and this happens to be the group of humans at the moment that reviews them, along with myself and Brandy. So I would just want to acknowledge that sometimes this process of understanding what good evidence looks like and whether it passes or doesn't pass, sometimes it's real clear and sometimes it's a little gray, and we are all working really hard to do our best with the best interests of our students in mind, ultimately. But yeah, I think everybody on this slide can acknowledge that it's sometimes tricky to have really great answers. So I know that at least I am not sure if all of the reviewers are here in the room, but I know at least some of the review team is here in the room. I'm happy to give you the floor for a second. Any reviewers, if you would like to turn on your camera and wave, or if you would like to introduce yourself to the group. Sorry, I didn't ask you to do that, so I certainly won't obligate you to. But reviewers, if you would like to introduce yourselves to the group today, you can certainly do that. Oh, I see you are also, I see several of you in the chat. Christy and Amy and Stephanie. So these reviewers definitely do have a lot of insight, and I think it's possible we may want to try to draw on some of their insight as we're having some discussions today. Also, to the review team specifically, I want to remind you that we created a document for ourselves in our diploma review team folder. I think there may be things that come up today that as the review team, we want to think and talk some more about. So feel free to keep some notes on that document as well, review team. So thank you to those folks. All right, I'm at this point, I'm going to get started on our content for today. Actually, let me pause and talk about a couple of logistics first. First of all, for anybody who is just coming in, it will be important for you to have the link to the Google Drive folder where the materials live. I wonder, one of my colleagues, would you be willing to put that link into the chat one more time here? So have that document folder open, be ready to dive into those documents as we reference them throughout this morning. And I also just want to recognize, it was pointed out to me that some of the communication that has gone out recently has not included times for this training. So I just want you to know this is a half-day training. So we're getting started now about 9. We'll have a couple of breaks throughout the morning. We are planning to finish up by noon. So I think there was a misunderstanding or just a lack of information, and some people thought this was a full day workshop. We are planning for this to be a half-day workshop. So hopefully you're not disappointed by that. If you were planning on all day, now you've got a free afternoon. All right, thank you, Astrid, for putting that folder into the chat. Okay, here we go. I'm going to get us going. So at this point, where I want to start is to really go back to the nuts and bolts and the words that we use, and make sure that we are all using the right words in the right ways, so that we, have common language to know what we are talking about. You'll recognize, those of you who participated in training on September 16th, I believe, will recognize some of these slides. We just want to quickly review and make sure we're all talking the same way. So just remember, when we're talking about our adult diploma, we are talking about domains, which are subjects, and there are 5 of them. We are talking about areas, which are within the domains. So there are 4 sections within each domain. We call those areas. And we are talking about competencies. So the competencies refer to skills. So within each area, there are competencies. Some have just a couple and some have a whole lot. So those are words you're going to hear a lot again today. So just want to make sure we've all got that straight in our heads. Here are the 5 domains of the adult diploma: ELA, math, science, social studies, and employability. So again, we're going to be hearing about those 5 domains a lot today. Within each of the domains, there are 4 areas. I haven't made a slide for each one. That seemed like a little much, but as an example, within ELA, the 4 areas are reading, writing, language, and speaking and listening. And then that means that 5 domains times 4 areas means that there are a total of 20 areas. And sort of, nuts and bolts, bottom line is, to earn a standard adult high school diploma, a student has to submit a portfolio. That portfolio has to have evidence of completion of competencies in all 20 areas. So that's our starting point, and the language we're going to be using all morning. A little bit more about what it means that this is a competency-based diploma. Again, kind of a reminder, but a kind of a grounding. Want to make sure we're starting from the same point. Competency-based means that this student's work has to demonstrate competency to someone who is not their teacher. So as reviewers, we don't know your students, we've never met them, we've never seen them, and we have to be able to look at this portfolio and confirm that they have demonstrated mastery. So this is different than the way a diploma is awarded with credits, right? And I would suggest that maybe none of us who are listening into this call hold a high school diploma that is competency-based. I believe probably most of us have a high school diploma that is credit-based. In other words, we sat in chairs in our high school building and did chemistry and algebra and all the courses we were expected to do. There might be a few of us in the room who have a diploma that is based on an assessment, like a GED test. But this competency-based diploma really is a different animal. So I do want to sort of encourage everyone to be thinking of the ways in which this is going to be different from your own high school experience, and even from the experience of just doing a diploma via an equivalency test like a GED or a HiSET. So that's our starting point. A couple of important documents. So these reference documents we talked about much more in depth on September 16th. So we won't walk through the documents again today, but I just want to remind you that they are there and that they are your reference materials, and that you should be actively using these documents as you oversee your adult diploma program. So one is the competencies document. And this is the document that actually lists the competencies for each area within each domain. A little note for you. We have just recently, actually this week, updated this document. So the version that is in the Google folder today for this training today is actually, I believe, I'm just clicking into it right now. Oh, no, that's not it. Starts with the word draft. Because we are still a little tentative about some of these updates, and they're not very big. But all of these documents and all of our references can change over time, can and do change over time. We hadn't updated this document since it was created, which was several years ago. So this updated document, basically, if you're looking at it and if you're curious, the changes are in red, so you can see them easily. Basically, we added a couple algebra standards that we had realized were missing, and also have separated out science and social studies competencies into more shorter competencies rather than longer combined competency statements. That's all I'm going to say about that for today, but we'll talk about this more at the October 17th working group. So hopefully, hope to have you join us then. Yeah, agreed, Christine, it's a living document. All of these documents are living documents in many ways. So that document is a really important sort of backbone of what we do in adult diploma. And then remember that the advantage, the strength of this adult diploma, competency-based diploma, is that students have different options to show they have completed the competencies. So the general options are high school credits, assessments, which is most often GED, adult ed instruction, and occasionally applied or experiential learning. So all the areas have multiple completion options. There's multiple ways for a student to show completion in all the areas, but also note that not all of the options apply to all of the areas, but it's definitely like this image here, a little bit of a puzzle where you fit the pieces together to make a portfolio. I also want to point out the other really important reference document, and honestly, probably for most of you, the document that you will use the most is the completion options document, the competency completion options document that is also in our folder. And this really is the detail of which options can you use for which areas and what evidence do you need, or what do you need to show. Note that this document is also in the process of being updated. The most significant update that we are working on is adding the HiSET into this document as an approved completion option. So again, we'll talk about that more at the upcoming Adult Diploma Working Group meeting on October 17th. All right, at this point, I wanted to take some time to sort of walk through for you, especially for those of you who are new, or also for those of you who haven't submitted recently, because this process has changed as of this summer. So some just the process and the timeline and what it looks like when you submit a portfolio or pieces of a portfolio for review. So the adult diploma portfolios are built within their SID record, which is a great feature because what it means is that students can stop out for a while and come back and they've still got their portfolio there in their record, or they can change adult ed programs and take up where they left off. So that is an excellent feature that we implemented a couple of years ago of actually building the portfolio right within SID. Basically, the process on your end to build a portfolio is that for each of the areas, you choose a completion option from the drop-down menu. This green shows that options have been chosen. This red is showing here a case where the completion options have not yet been chosen. I will note, this is a screenshot that the SID support people sent me. These particular completion options don't make a lot of sense. So kind of ignore those. We're not looking at content right now. We're just looking at structure. But this is what it looks like when you have toggled those drop downs and chosen the completion option. So you're going to choose the completion option. You're going to upload any evidence documents. You can upload more than one into each area. You don't have to have a document in every area, so that's flexible that way. And you can add comments if necessary. So this, you might add a comment about, oh, the evidence for this is in another section. That's a common thing. So that's the basics of how you're going to build a portfolio. And when you have an entire domain finished, so when you have all 4 areas with the completion options selected, all of the evidence uploaded, and any comments added, then at that point, if you are ready, if you believe that that domain should pass and you have all the evidence necessary, then you can submit that domain for review. For those of you who've been around for a while, you'll remember in the past, you had to build the whole portfolio. So all 5 areas, all 5 domains, all 20 areas. You no longer have to do that. Now you can submit them individual domains at a time, which is a great, it's a nice advantage. It's a good improvement on the system. So what happens after you hit submit? So I'll just say again, remember, this is a competency-based diploma, which means that human reviewers are checking for evidence of mastery and competency. And the diploma is only awarded after thorough review of all evidence. So essentially what happens is the first 2 of the 6 review team members are assigned to review. They review, give feedback, make recommendations, and then one of us, at least one of us on the MDE team, currently mostly either me or my colleague Brandy, are also checking and making that final decision and determination about whether or not something passes. In SID, while we are doing that process, this is what it will look like on your end. It will say submitted in the student's record. In terms of the timeline, if you submit a portfolio, if you submit the whole thing, so all 5 domains, every piece of evidence, or if you've submitted part of the evidence before and now you are submitting that the last domain so that you've completed the whole portfolio, then you can expect to get results within 30 days. If it's going to be longer than 30 days, I will reach out to you as a program manager to let you know, but we've been doing a pretty good job. We have been able to turn these around within 30 days in the case of a full portfolio. In the case of a partial portfolio, so if you submit 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 domains, we have a lot of those right now, as the review team can attest to. We basically are putting them on a list in terms of first in, first out. So we will review the oldest ones first. But at this point, and we would love to be able to turn those around in 30 days. And I do hope at some point we may get to that point. But it is a capacity issue, and I definitely will not promise you 30 days in this scenario. And because we are assuming that you are moving forward and working with the student on the rest of their portfolio in the meantime. So just be aware of that timeline. Yes, Christy, there are a lot of submissions right now. So just know that the review team, everybody on the review team has another job besides being a reviewer. This is something extra that they are doing on top of their regular day-to-day work. And here at MDE, we are managing multiple projects, including adult diploma. So please know if there's a delay that it really just is capacity, and we're moving as quickly as we can. So once the review is finished, then each domain and area are rated a pass or a not pass. And if there is an area that doesn't pass, you will get feedback on why. And you will have the option to resubmit at any time. So just a note about resubmissions. If something doesn't pass, you can resubmit it at any time, an unlimited number of times. So sometimes it's just an oversight. Sometimes you forgot something. Sometimes you uploaded the wrong thing. Sometimes it's really simple, and sometimes you find out, oops, I missed that. You can literally upload it and resubmit it the next day, and that's fine. Sometimes a student could disappear and you can't resubmit until 6 months or a year or 2 years later. That is also fine. There's no limit on how many times. If you submit once and it doesn't pass, you submit again, it still doesn't pass. You can do that. There's no 3 strikes, you're out. Keep going, keep trying, it's fine. I will just reassure you that the majority of portfolios, especially from newer programs, have at least one piece of evidence, sometimes more, that doesn't pass the first time around. That is normal. It is not a judgment by any means. It's just recognition of the fact this is kind of a complex beast, and it takes a lot. There's a lot to sort of remember and keep in mind and keep straight. So please don't be discouraged at all if you submit and something is not passed. It's just an opportunity to learn and improve. and you've got lots of second chances. I will also reassure you that the overwhelming majority of portfolios that have been submitted have eventually passed. Sometimes it takes, resubmission of a couple of different things. Sometimes it takes the student doing some additional work, but in almost all cases, eventually we work together, reviewers and the program and the student to get that portfolio to a pass. Typically, the only time that doesn't happen is if a student disappears. So if they move away, they decide they don't want to, whatever, and there's something pending, then that, might stay as a not pass. But other than that, if you and the student are willing to commit to continue working until you get it right, almost always we can get these portfolios to a pass. So once the portfolio is passed, once we have marked passed on all of the 20 areas within the portfolio, then you have access to official diploma documents right within their SID record. And just a reminder that then you are the one who provides copies to the student. We do not do that from MDE anymore. The volume has just gotten too big. And we actually don't have a physical building we are working out of right now. So that is part of your responsibility on your end. You can provide print copies, you can provide electronic copies. We typically advise you to sort of, if you're printing copies, think about what does your organization do? If you're a district, how does your district print out high school diplomas for the high school graduates? So sort of use your organization's standards for printing and providing documents. Yeah, thanks, Christine. I agree. There's always this portfolio process has been a learning process over the years, and we are continuing to learn, and we never expect anyone to be perfect. We are all working it out along the way. Oh, Christy, I'm glad that you like having the ability to print records in-house. Yeah, it's definitely more efficient than when we used to send them out from MDE because you have them right away. And you can provide PDF copies to your students as well. Okay, so at this point, all of what I've said so far, hopefully is review, mostly to you, or maybe not the details of the portfolio process, but basically kind of nuts and bolts logistics. I think a lot of that was a review for a lot of you. And now kind of looking forward to what we need. The content we want to dive into today is really to think more deeply and spend more time looking at and discussing what evidence goes in this student portfolio. So that's sort of the million-dollar question that we are going to try to answer today as best we can in the time we have. Although I will, before we really dive in, I will just encourage you to go ahead and start working with students to pull together portfolios and to go ahead and submit things for review, even if you are not 100% confident. Sort of do your best, and the review process will really help you see what else is necessary or what else is needed. So as long as you can hold on and have patience for that review process, we can help get everybody, in most cases, to the point where that evidence is passable. All right, so it's kind of setting the framework here, setting a foundation again about the words we are using and what we mean when we say them. So, we often talk about the word evidence. Typically, basically, what we mean when we say evidence are documents. Almost everything you're going to put in your portfolio is a document. One exception might be you could put a link potentially, like if a student has a presentation, is speaking and listening evidence. As part of that evidence, you might have a link to the recording, which is great. We love seeing that. But mostly, for the most part, what we're saying when we say evidence is documents. So first off, just some general tips about documents. Please use PDFs. Please don't use Word documents, because as reviewers, the volume of documents we have to open is quite high. And when you put PDFs, they just open in our browsers, which is lovely. If you put Word documents into the portfolio, then you click on it and it launches Word, and it's just like a longer, more onerous, more time consuming task to read a Word document than it is to read a PDF. So please be nice to us and use PDFs if you can. If you are scanning student work, which is absolutely acceptable, you might have something that a student did handwritten, and you'll see some examples of that this morning. That's absolutely fine. Scan student work, no problem. However, if we as reviewers cannot read what your student did, it doesn't work. So you have to be sure that your scan is dark enough, that it's clear enough, that the quality is high enough. And we know sometimes that can be tricky, but it's all we've got. We need you to make sure that we as reviewers can read what your students did and that we can see that they demonstrated mastery. There's just no two ways around that. We sometimes have had some back and forth with programs of like, oh, the scan, I can't get my scanner to scan better. And while I empathize with that, there is really no workaround for that one. We really need to be able to read it. And then a third tip, which is an important one, you do not need to put the same document into a portfolio, into a single student's portfolio more than once. So if you have a document that is evidence for more than one area, just upload it into one area, and then anywhere else that you're going to use it in the portfolio, you can just add in the comments section, see evidence in reading. So common examples of when you're going to do that would be if you're using high school credits for a lot of, a number of different areas, you're going to use the transcript and some kind of analysis form. You do not have to upload the transcript document into every single area, but just upload it once and refer to it in the other areas. Lindsay, really good point about a scan. Yes, think about taking an image if the scan doesn't work. I think that's a great idea. And I think the way that works best is, if you can, I think what Brandy is thinking, maybe if you can use your iPhone to scan an image and convert it to PDF, that's awesome. Or if you can take an image and then put it in a Google Doc or a Word doc that you save as a PDF. Yes. So I think an image is a great idea if a scan is not working, but make sure that the document that you're actually uploading into the portfolio is a PDF, not like a JPEG or something else. Yeah, but that's a really good point and a good strategy. Yeah, thanks everybody. Yes, thanks for some of you talking about how to do that in the chat. That's awesome. All right, so those are general tips about that kind of apply to all of the documents that you are going to put into your portfolio. Then I want to point out that there are, as a starting point, there are 2 pieces of evidence that have to be in every single portfolio, no exceptions. So the first one is a piece of student writing. So no matter what completion option they have for ELA and for the ELA domain, for the writing area, every single portfolio has to have a piece of student writing. Yes, that is true if they pass the GED. Yes, that is true if they have 4 years of high school credits in English. In all cases, there must be a piece of student writing. And Christine in a little bit is going to kind of walk us through some more specifics of what requirements that piece of writing has to hit. The other one is a student resume that goes in the employability section. Doesn't have to be super fancy, but it does have to be an authentic, real resume in every portfolio. So starting points for that. If you're looking for more specifics about either of these, I'll just refer you to that competency completion options document. I think page 7 or 8 has kind of the bullet lists of here's what you need, but we're not going to dive too deeply into that today. So other than those 2 pieces of evidence, where does the writing get submitted in the portfolio? Yeah, good question, Denise. So the writing sample, you always put it in as a document that you upload into the writing area within the ELA domain. So it goes in writing. Good question. All right, other than those two required things, the kind of evidence and the kind of documents you're going to upload into the portfolio are going to vary based on what completion option is chosen. And we're going to detail more of this as we move forward here, but as a starting point, if you're using assessments, you need an official score report or some other record of that official assessment. If you're using high school credits, you need the official transcript from the district or the school that awarded the credit. Plus, you need to give for us, for your reviewers, some analysis or your interpretation of how those credits work in the diploma portfolio. If you're using adult ed instruction, you have to include a piece of at least one piece of student produced work, plus any additional supporting explanation or evidence. So we're going to talk more about all of that here. Before we kind of dive in, I do want to just acknowledge that what we're not going to really talk much about today is applied and experiential learning. So applied and experiential learning is a competency completion option, and it is available in many areas. However, at this point, what I can say, having had my eyes on lots and lots and lots of portfolios, is that it's not very frequently used. And because it really would be a scenario where a student has some kind of training or experience or knowledge that they gained somewhere other than high school. So it wouldn't be represented on their high school transcript or in your program. So we're finding it's not super common. And when you're using that option, it's tricky to say exactly what the evidence could look like, because it really does depend on what their experience is. But it could be that it's a certification or some other official document of some training that they have been through, or it could just be a reflection or description writing by the student of what their experience was. So we are not going to dive very deeply into that today because it's not as common. All right, I'm going to pause right here before we kind of dig down even deeper. I'm going to encourage you to think about if you have any questions so far. And this is a good point to a good place to point out that within the materials folder for today, there is a document that has a place for you to put questions. And I'm wondering if one of my colleagues who's looking at the slideshow could grab that link and yeah, see you, Lindsay. Thanks. Put that in the chat. So that document is in your folder, so you may already see it, but Lindsay put the link to it directly. This is a place, if you have questions that don't belong in the chat, or you don't want to put them in the chat, or they don't fit with the flow, definitely add them to this questions document. We did this in the September 16th training, and I think it worked really well. We will try to, eventually update the document to include all answers to any questions you all ask today or moving forward. It's just kind of a parking lot place in case things, in case we don't have a chance to answer all of the questions today, which I suspect is going to be the case. I do see a question in the chat about GED score reports. Yeah. Yeah, so GED score reports from either from your GED manager access or the student's My GED account. Heather, coming up, I'll show you a couple of examples from portfolios. Yeah, making the scores readable is an important task. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So, and yeah, at this point, I also just, we've been sitting for a while. I've been talking at you for a while. So I just encourage you to move your body for a second. Stand up if you need to. Are there any other questions? All right. I'm going to keep us going then. Okay, I just have a few more kind of higher level things, and then I'm going to hand it off to Christine and Lindsay for a bit here. So at this point, we're going to really start digging deeper into, okay, what does high quality evidence look like? And we're going to really focus in on the 3 completion options that, make up the vast majority of all of the portfolios we see. So that is adult ed instruction, high school credits, and GED tests. So we're going to start with what's hardest, because it feels like we should maybe get that out of the way while we have the most brain power still available in the room. So we're going to start with adult ed instruction because, yeah, that is the most complex, the most detailed completion option in terms of the evidence that is required. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about it. And once we get through all of that, then we will be able to tackle the ones that are a little bit easier. So when you are choosing adult ed instruction as the completion option, what that means is you are saying that this student has received instruction in all competencies in the area in your program. Now, we recognize it's possible some of that could be kind of brush up, especially if you've got a student who recently dropped out of high school and they're smart and they learn quick, and you start doing geometry and they're like, oh yeah, I remember, I know how to do that. So, we're not saying that they have to have sat in your classroom for 4 years necessarily, but if you're using adult ed instruction, you're saying that they received instruction in all competencies in the area and that they have mastered at least one competency at level E. So just a note about this, in terms of the completion options and the type of evidence you need in the portfolio, the burden of proof is highest for adult ed instruction. So really, we recommend that you use this option kind of as the last option, because it's sort of, in some ways, can be the biggest hill to climb in terms of the adult diploma portfolio. So if they have high school credits, use as many of those as you can in the portfolio. If they have assessments or GED tests or can get those GED tests are far more straightforward in terms of evidence in the adult diploma portfolio than adult ed instruction. So we really assume in most cases that you are working to use high school credits, get your students GED tests if that makes sense. And wherever those 2 things are not possible or don't make sense, you are using adult ed instruction to fill in the gaps. So we're going to start again with kind of the areas where it's, the heaviest lift and where we have the most to talk about, and that is ELA and math. So when you are using adult ed instruction as the completion option for ELA and math, here is sort of a starting point of what you need to do, what you need to include. I would again just remind you that they're on the competency completion options document. The first several pages of that are really kind of overview, and that is where you will find details of all of the requirements for everything that needs to be in the portfolio. So this is kind of a quick list, but please do reference that competency completion options document and that initial section to understand all of the details. So if you're using adult ed instruction for ELA and math, you need to include a course description document, which is essentially what that does is it verifies to us as reviewers that your student has received all of the instruction in all of the competencies. You want to include the total number of instructional hours that they completed in the domain or in the area, whichever way makes the most sense to break it out. You want to clearly state for your reviewers which level E standard is demonstrated. Remember, they only need to demonstrate mastery of one level E standard in the work, and we as reviewers need to know which one we are looking for. And if it's not clear how or where to find their demonstration of mastery, please explain that to us. Please explain how the work shows mastery. We recommend, but don't require, we recommend that you use this cover sheet, which just is a place to record much of the information that's in that bulleted list on the previous slide. This document, this cover sheet document, is included in your materials for today. I think it's in that subfolder. The subfolder is called Templates and Documents for Use in Portfolio. So this cover sheet is in there. Laura makes a good point. The number of hours is difficult at times, especially if they're working remotely and not using an online program. Yeah, absolutely. We agree with that, Laura. And what I would say in that case is give us the number of instructional hours in your program, and then tell us, in addition, the student spent significant time on their own. We estimate at least X number of hours or something like that. Yeah, like Amy is saying, make a reasonable approximation. And basically the reason we're doing that is because if you are saying that your student received all of the geometry instruction, but they only had 2.5 instructional hours, that doesn't seem quite right. Yeah, Denise, good question. No, there is not a minimum number of hours needed, because we recognize that students are showing up to your programs with very different backgrounds. If you have a student who dropped out of high school 2 years ago and remembers a lot of it, that's very different than a student who immigrated from Guatemala 15 years ago and only finished 6th grade, right? So the amount of instructional hours those two students are going to need is different, and that's why we didn't set a minimum. But keep in mind that you are saying, by using the completion option, you are saying that you have covered all of that instructional content with your student. So it does sometimes raise a bit of a red flag for reviewers if you say you've done it in a very, very, very small amount of hours, especially if the student evidence doesn't seem very high quality. So, yep, good question. All right, I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay, and I'm actually going to let Lindsay take over the screen.
Awesome. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes, looks good. Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to dive into math, and I'm going to give you the heads up that I'm going to ask for your participation in the chat a lot. So get ready to type. I got to get my chat open so I can see. So just to start off, again, we've already heard this, but 2 questions to really think through and ask when submitting evidence is, okay, which standard is the student showing mastery of? And then does the evidence that I'm submitting, does that match the standard? And does it demonstrate mastery? So we are going to look at some student examples. Names have been taken off, but we'll get to see and critique some real life examples to hopefully give some more concreteness to what we've been talking about. Before we do that, I would love for you to put in the chat, what kinds of things would you look for on a student's paper to tell if they understand a math concept? What would you look for if you're working with a student on math, they're completing work, you're thinking, I'm going to submit this, what would you look for to see if they understand? And I'll give you a moment. More than an answer, showing their thinking. Anything else? Correct answer, work shown, their thought process. Did they draw it? Did they diagram the process? Showing all the steps, showing their work. Yep, understanding the process, successful setup and solution of problems. Showing how they did it. Yeah, so it can be kind of tricky because student work can, is going to look different potentially for every student. But we are going to look at a few and keep these things in mind that you just put in the chat as we look at examples. And we're not really going to focus on like, is this a pass? Is this a fail? We're really going to focus on, is this high quality or could it be stronger? So we're going to look at one example in each of the 4 areas. So for number sense, this is the level E standard that we're going to look at extend the properties of exponents to rational exponents. And here is an example of student work. And I'm going to give you a moment to look at that. And then my question in the chat is, what is strong about this evidence? What could be improved? Any ideas? I'll give an example. One thing that I think is very strong about this is that the standard is clearly marked, so I know exactly what standard we're working with, and I see, so the process is strong, the organization is weak. Okay, it does show the student thought process. It could be clear, seems very disconnected, but okay. So looking at this problem, I can see that they are, maybe this is what you mean by the disconnected part, like they're breaking down each part under the square root, right, and simplifying and then showing their answer. And so there is some, I can see what the student is thinking, and I can kind of guess, like, okay, this is what how they're breaking it down, and this is how they're arriving at their answer. So that is strong. It's not just equals blank, right? So there is some thought process that is shown there. There aren't any, on this particular screenshot, there aren't any points awarded. So like, we also want to see feedback from the teacher on the work as well. Like, what did you think? How many points did you award if it was a 4-point question? Do you have any comments that you want to make on it? So being able to see teacher feedback is also a strength. And then this one, I took a screenshot of this, and I believe, if I remember correctly, because I looked at a few, this was at the end of a, I think it was a capstone task that had several pieces of work of like level D standards within the same area. And I cannot remember if there were more questions for this standard or not. But if we just look at this, okay, if this was the only one, you can see some level of mastery here, but it would be even stronger if there were multiple questions to demonstrate mastery, especially if not in this case, but especially if a student didn't do well. If you only have one, or there are errors and they got half the points or something, then it would be harder for reviewers to say, yes, definitely demonstrated mastery, if there weren't several questions to be able to see that there's a pattern of being able to solve these problems, if that makes sense. So there isn't like you have to submit this many problems, but if there is only one, there's just a greater chance of maybe reviewers having questions. And then the last point I want to make, this one is fine. We can see the student work, but you can also notice some of these faint marks in the background. I don't know if that was extra comments or something, but the quality of the photocopy, right? Like we can, if that was important information, which I don't know if it was in this case, something to think about that Jody mentioned earlier as well. So some things that are strong about this, yes, and then there are some ways that can be improved. With algebra, here is a standard. I'll give you a moment to read that. And then I'm going to ask you the same question in the chat about a piece of work. What is strong? What do you think could be improved? So here's the work. I know it's a little small, but if you can kind of get the overall of what's happening, what is strong and what could be improved? I'm going to cover this up a little bit and add that this one did have an explanation submitted. I believe, Denise, I'm going to try to answer your question, but someone correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that we want mastery of the competency. So the competencies are going to be the skills or the standards that are listed in each area. And then we want to see demonstrated mastery of those skills. Ah, there you go. Yep. Okay, so there's a strong part. Each example shows steps and how to get their answers. The student shows a lot of their work. Yes, it would be nice if there was more space to do the work. Yeah, maybe there was an additional sheet that could be attached. Process is shown. There's teacher notes on here. There's multiple examples. Yes. And the standard is clearly marked. So I know like what standard I'm trying to match this to. And there are 10 examples instead of 1, right? And so I think that is also a strong point, just again, helping demonstrate that mastery. And then with this explanation, right? Clearly marking in the cover sheet, if you submit that, or if you don't, like being able to somehow share this kind of information, here's the standard, and then here is my explanation of how this evidence matches this standard and shows mastery. So I'm going to make sure. Yeah. Okay. We'll move on to, if my screen works, the next one, data, statistics, and probability. Here is another one, another standard to read. And now I'm going to click through, and there are actually several screenshots because there are multiple problems with this one piece of evidence. So be thinking what is strong, what could be improved, but I am going to click through a few problems before I have you put things in the chat. So we have this dot plot that the student is supposed to create with this data. And then here is the student work. We have this data of a calendar and degrees, and then the student's supposed to create a histogram, and this is the student work. And then here is another set of data, and the student is supposed to create a box and whisker plot, and here is the student work. This was another piece, still the student work, part 2, interpreting and analyzing graphs. So some trends and conclusions for the dot plot, some trends and conclusions for the histogram, and the trends and conclusions for the box and whisker plot. So Jesse, I see your comment, and maybe you typed it before I clicked this, but yes, I like that point, because if this was all that was submitted, just the student representation of the data in the dot plot, the histogram, and the box plot, it wouldn't demonstrate full mastery because part of the standard is missing. And so every part of the standard needs to be shown when submitting evidence. And so there is this part 2 to show the interpreting of data for those. Yes, exactly. But right on, because that's exactly what we need to be thinking about, is every part of the standard being shown. And the standard talks about dot plots, histograms, and box plots. And so one of each of those was submitted. Denise, I'm going to say yes, as long as course description is included for the level D competencies, saying that the student had instruction with those. But someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, yes, you can do multiple questions with that level E standard. And again, that does give more information to the reviewers to really say, oh yeah, demonstrates mastery. Because even if there are like small errors here and there, if there are many questions to look at, you can get a sense like, yes, there's a few maybe calculation errors or a few errors here, but overall the student really understands. The more evidence I have to see, the easier I can make that determination. And yeah, so the summarizing, the representing, and the interpreting of the data, being able to create those different representations, and then having the interpretations here. Anything strong or about this that you want to mention, or anything missing? Very organized, easy to see. The standard isn't clearly marked, okay? And there's no teacher feedback that we can see. Yeah. And again, I mean, I'm like, I'm finding evidence from portfolios, and if I didn't copy paste the feedback, so if someone recognizes this, because again, I don't even know whose this is, I forgot, but if someone recognizes this and you're like, I did submit feedback, I didn't put it on here, but on purpose, because I want us to recognize, oh, there's feedback missing, right? So like that feedback is really, really important.
Lindsay, can I just, piggyback on that a little bit?
Yes.
I would say, because I think Rebecca is asking a good question, what does feedback look like if the answer is correct, which is a good point. I think for me as a reviewer, what I'm looking for is, I want to know that the teacher has corrected this. I want to know that the teacher has indicated to the student and to me as a reviewer, which answers are correct and which are not correct. And the feedback I'm usually interested in is what is in the case of when the student did not answer a question correctly. So I would say that's sort of baseline of what I'm looking for in terms of feedback is correction and having to be clear to the reviewer without me having to work the problems myself, whether or not they have the right answer. And as Stephanie's pointing out, also sometimes, I think we'll see an example like this later of like, if you say +2 for a question, well, is that 2 out of 5 or is that 2 out of 2? Like that kind of thing can be really important for your reviewers to understand. Did a student get full credit for this answer or partial credit, things like that.
Yeah. And I think too, after I said all that, I remember with this one, I did read a comment from a teacher in the portfolio when it was submitted that yes, to the student kind of feedback, like, yes, you made conclusions about the data. The conclusions and the inferences that you made could have been more in depth. So kind of giving that, like, there was some feedback, like, yes, I see that you're making conclusions, you're interpreting, they could have been more in depth. So I could tell that there were some points, if there were points, there were some points that were missing. But yeah, so yes, and being able to tell the difference, reviewers have to tell the difference. What did the student write? What did the reviewers write? Yeah, and there's not just one right way to do it, but as long as it's very clear, so that's very vague, that is helpful. Okay, so we already talked about this one. Last example with geometry. Here is the standard, and this is going to be similar to the last one. There's going to be several problems for this one standard with this one task. So here is the first problem with this piece of evidence. And here's the second. And again, just kind of looking for an overview. Here's the third. And here's the fourth, the last problem in this task. And this was also submitted. So when you have some ideas of like what's strong, what could be improved, please put them in the chat. Yeah, So the feedback is really helpful. Like you can kind of see, wow, that's very helpful. Like when I'm reviewing this, oh, I can tell that the student did a good job as far as what the teacher was expecting with the comments and the point values and whatnot. It's very clear. It's in blue ink versus pencil. So this one's very clear whose writing is whose. Let's see, very comprehensive work. Yes, the standard stipulates each of, so in the beginning, there was this cone, cylinder, pyramid, and spheres. So each of the shapes listed in the standard were covered in that. That is essential. And clear expectations, grading feedback from the teacher, good structure for students to show their work and thinking. Now, and I love that we can see the students thinking. The student really is describing their process and how they solved. Yeah, I personally am like, oh, this is really impressive with this problem, right? You need to solve problems, and then they're using these formulas, showing their work, explaining their thinking, and one for each of the shapes that was listed in the standard. So I personally don't have a suggestion. I'm like, this could be stronger if, but if you come up with one, please let me know. I do think this one is pretty comprehensive. If a student works on several problems, how many need to be correct to show mastery? Or do they all have to be correct? I believe it's an 80% mastery that is needed. And so point values, then if you're assigning point values as a teacher, then that is very helpful to demonstrate how are you assigning points and did a student get 80%? Am I correct, Jody?
Yeah. Yes, and I would say,
Yes,
so
and.
in the competency completions options document, if you read carefully, it will say demonstrate mastery at 80%. Now for math, that's definitely doable. What does 80% look like for ELA? That's impossible, right? And even for math, I will say as a reviewer, if there are, if there are only a few points and a student missed a couple of them that seemed like most important, but technically the score works out to 80%, I might not be entirely convinced. As a reviewer, I am looking for clear demonstration of mastery, which in my mind doesn't, end at 79%. So I would say, it does say 80% in the document, but I wouldn't use that as your goal. Your goal is not to get 80% out of your student. Your goal is to help them master the content and then give us a piece of evidence that we have no doubt that they have mastered the content.
And I would say too, I mean, like, even if some of these calculations were incorrect, say the multiplication was wrong, but yet everything else on this paper is what it is. I would still think that the student demonstrated mastery. So some of those like calculation errors here and there versus the process, oh my gosh, you know exactly what you're doing. I think that is most important.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that, Lindsay. It depends on what the error is and whether or not that could be just a simple, oops, that was just a mistake in the numbers, or whether it's oh, you clearly don't understand what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Denise, Jody, can you answer Denise's question?
Oh, yeah, good question. Can assessments like this be revised after feedback without starting over? Yes, absolutely. In fact, that's sort of what we prefer. Like, if you submit something like this and reviewers say, wait, we can't quite see evidence because of XYZ, then you go back to your student and say, oh, reviewers couldn't see mastery. Let's do this additional problem, or let's work this one again, and then submit for us an additional piece of student evidence. Yes, we like that. Don't start over.
So keep the questions coming in the chat. Just a reminder to kind of close out this math section. But this is true of all of them. So in addition to all the different domains, but in addition to student produced evidence of mastery of the one level E standard, or at least one level E standard that you choose, submitting a course description that shows that all level D and E standards were covered in instruction. And so this is just a screenshot of part of a page. It was a very long document, and I'm sure you have these as well, but this is an example of starting to list out, these are the standards that were met in instruction, and it's very detailed. So that would need to be submitted in addition.
Ooh, that's a really good question, Lee. And I think, yeah, so Lee's question is, should a reviewer who has never taught mathematics be able to determine if the student's work demonstrates competency in an area? Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think ideally, in an ideal world, we would have math teachers reviewing math evidence. In the actual world, that is not what we have. I am not a math teacher. I have never taught math, and I do have my eyes on all of these. So I would say ideally, yes. I would say our reviewers who are trained as math teachers have better insights than I do. And I will often go to Lindsay and Andy, particularly, who are trained as math teachers, if I have questions. But ideally, yeah, ideally the evidence would be clear even to somebody who's not a math expert.
Mhm.
So I think, Jody, are we taking a 5-minute stretch break now?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Fine.
So if you have questions, please put them in the document that you had open earlier, and we will keep looking at that, or put questions in the chat. But otherwise, take a 5-minute stretch break and come back and we'll jump into ELA. Well, we won't. Christine will.
All right, everyone. Yeah, Christine, we see your screen. Do folks want to give us a quick message in the chat or a thumbs up that you are back and ready to dive into ELA? Cool. Christine, just a note to you before we get started. I realized that we didn't add a slide anywhere for showing people where the example capstone tasks are on the Atlas website. And I wonder if we should do that either before you jump in or when you are done with ELA. What do you think?
How about this?
Yeah.
How about Lindsay quickly create a slide?
Oh,
And
I'm on it. Yep. I'll
See,
put it-
see, I didn't even have to say anything. Lindsay and I are beginning to share the same brain.
got it. That's
and
awesome.
that is just wonderful for me. Maybe
Cool.
not for her.
No, it's great.
All right, sounds good. Take it away, Christine.
Great. So hi, everybody. You will see me looking up my other monitor. I am not watching horror movies, although that is what I do in October. I have the chat and above on my other screen. And so welcome. We're going to talk about ELA, and I did a really, really deep dive. And just very, very quickly, one of the things that I want to say is that I think it's important to let students know how much time and consideration the work that they're doing is getting, either, you know, by the program staff who are submitting it as evidence and really, you know, looking it over and supporting the student to turn in the best work possible. And then the portfolio reviewers who are going deep and spending significant time with your students' work. That is one of the things I love most about Diploma, is knowing that the work students put in, that there is equal or even more work coming from everyone else, which is what their students' hard work deserves. And so it's great to know and to be able to tell students that it isn't going to just pass through. Like, people are really going to read what they wrote and read the work that they did. So I'm going to talk a little bit. It's going to be a little different than Lindsay's. I'm going to give some examples, and I want to remind everyone again, I thought that this was a great slide of Lindsay's. It's not about pass versus fail. All of the evidence you're going to see come from portfolios and evidence that has passed. And, you know, looking at high quality versus what could be strengthened. So remember, in addition to student-produced evidence of mastery in one level E standard, you need to submit a course description that shows that all level D and E standards are covered in instruction. This is just a little example. I remember having to create one of these. Many of us create these for the 5-year narrative. And as you see here, for example, college and career readiness standards, you know, it lists out the teacher articulates what's being covered. You don't have to articulate like how exactly in every way, but that you are providing instruction that is aligned to the D standards and E standards. And we need to set up tasks so that students have the opportunity to demonstrate a level E standard. So we do have to create some, you know, rich tasks, but the task itself is not a guarantee of proficiency. And I think we've talked about this and we'll continue to talk about this. And that's really, you know, we can create very challenging tasks, and the evidence isn't a level E, or even a level D at some points. So that's where it's so important, the relationship we have with our students and our eyes on their work and the teaching that we provide. One more point is that when you do claim a level E standard, you need to show evidence of every part of the standard. And so, for example, if for speaking and listening, I used to claim this one, several people use this one as well. It's the anchor standard is evaluating an argument and claims and looking at the reasoning and the sufficiency of evidence. The level E standard specifically says that students need to assess, or we need to demonstrate where they have been able to assess that reasoning is valid, if it's relevant and sufficient, and there has to be evidence that students can identify false statements or fallacious reasoning. So here's a great example that I pulled, because it doesn't have to be an extensive discussion of a fallacy. But here the student says a speaker uses appeal to authority fallacy. Just because he believes inmates are being treated cruelly doesn't mean it's true. He is a journalist, not a lawyer or a judge. That is a really nice demonstration. It's short and sweet, but it is, it is a great demonstration that the student, does understand and recognize that there's this appeal to authority there. So this is just an example that we want to make sure that all aspects of the standard, and some of the level E standards are short and some of them are quite long. So again, all portfolios must contain at least one piece of student writing. It is an informative or an argument essay. And you use the checklists that are on the Atlas website, and that will help ensure that you're submitting evidence that meets the requirements. And those checklists were developed and approved, discussed, played with, everything by the working group. And so you need to submit the checklist and make sure that if you check it, it's there. So very quickly, we have two checklists. One is informative essay student writing, and the other one is argumentative. And one of them must accompany writing evidence to demonstrate that level D standards have been met. But evidence can demonstrate any writing anchor at level E. So make sure that you include which kind of essay in the evidence very clearly, accompanying checklist, and then a clear articulation of that level E standard and how the evidence meets that level E standard. So we have the informative, we have the argument. Jody reminds us both checklists are in the participant folder. So let's take a look at some articulations. Here is an example on the cover sheet for the writing sample. And this, I would say, is like a gold standard, right? That everything may not look like this, but I thought it was good to kind of show, like, it is kind of the gold standard, that the claim is anchor 4 at a level E, producing clear and coherent writing. And then the evidence it's articulated, that touching on audience, that the student knew the audience, that the student did, go through the process of assessing the evidence because it is a research paper. The student developed, there's talk about the development in the organization, that students did a rough draft, and then there was revision going on, which is all part of producing clear and coherent writing. And if you can't read super fast because it's Friday morning, remember, you will get these slides. Here's another example, which works as well. It's the same writing anchor. Again, the student wrote this informative essay on minimum wage. It was organized, informative, different sources were cited. It had appropriate vocabulary and tone, and there were multiple revisions of the text. That the teacher, the multiple revisions don't have to be included, but it's nice that this is in the articulation so that the reviewers, you say clear and coherent writing, but then you're articulating how the evidence that reviewers are about to see supports that. And yes, these screenshots are clips from the recommended cover sheet. So going through SID and spending hours and hours and hours was actually really enjoyable. I can't believe I'm saying that, but what I saw, for example, the writing that students are doing in the topics was pretty awesome. I just really was excited by what I was seeing. in portfolios. And argument essays are not an option as much as the informative essay. Your student can do either. But I put this up because I think that particularly in the informative essays, there's so many ways a student could go with that student writing. And lots of examples, students doing a deep dive into a potential career pathway, like becoming a data scientist, how to become a CNA, you know, some you know, topics, mental health topics. Students are writing on that, the schizophrenia awareness, a day in the world with borderline personality disorder. These are really, really powerful. The Ojibwe history came from a class that's being taught that's combining the social studies and ELA, or the student writing, and a lot of different themes there. And I included big dogs versus small dogs. I loved this one, you know, and I think we have to remember that there's just a wide range of topics, and this is really a chance for students to choose something that they're really interested in. And consider combining the content, the sample, or the writing, student writing, with science and social studies. So let's take a moment. I just chose three excerpts from some different essays. And I just want to take a look here for a few minutes about what is strong and what could be improved. And I chose each of these very purposefully because of what they show. So take a moment, read it over, and chat in the chat box what you think is strong or anything that you think could be improved. Yes, there are citations which are required. Also a lot, so maybe some limitations on the transitions. Exploring opposing viewpoints. General organization, sure, there's a room for improvement. Doesn't change with a new idea. Yeah, so you can see that there are definitely some areas for improvement, but I also want us to focus on, there are definitely some strengths here. And I think about, you know, this piece of writing and, you know, this student being able to, at this point, use transitions, understand the concept of citations, have some solid examples, understand, including an opposing viewpoint. This is really exciting, that the student is taking writing skills like this going out into the world. And there's always room to improve. But I also, I liked this because it's not overly academic, and yet it works. The writing doesn't have to read like a dissertation, right? And it can, yeah, there's a definite understanding of the audience, which is a key part. Yeah, you know, Laura, I'll talk about the citation question in just a second. Here's a second one. This one is from an argument essay. Again, take a look at it, and a few of you could add to the chat box a strength or two, and then an area potentially of growth. There's more academic language here. Okay. There are citations. These look different than the ones in the first sample, but they're still. Yeah, and remember, this is just an excerpt from a longer essay, but yes, Jesse, absolutely. And that idea of the writer agreeing and disagreeing and why that perspective is going to become even more important overall, because as we add the high set, students in the essay they write for the high set must include very clearly their position on the topic. There's some transition words. One thing I liked is the sentence about Americans spending 6.9 billion hours and the car emissions that are produced, and that one step further, by reducing emissions and pollution, people on the planet would breathe fresher air. It reminds me of when I have taught GED and I've said, you want to include your evidence, but then you want to make a connection about why that evidence connects to the claim that you're making. We're going to look at one more here. And the topic is driverless cars. Yeah, some use of direct quotes. Yes. This is the last piece of evidence, and this was a great example of an informative essay that was on a really important life skill, which is saving money. And this was part of just some important financial skills in general, which is a really relevant topic for some of our students. So take a look. Remember, this is an excerpt. There are citations in other parts of this essay. Thank you, Lynn. Yes. Very nice semicolon use. This is also informative. Thank you. That's a great question. I that would have been helpful for me to clarify. Yep. One more supporting detail sentence. Great sentence structure. Yeah, I think it's really good to see these as parts of passing essays. They're not perfect, but we are looking for, or the reviewers are looking for something that that definitely has evidence that the student is able to demonstrate the standard. Again, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for high school level, which I'm just excited because I think that sometimes writing is a weakness for students who get a regular or traditional diploma, and that students are demonstrating some writing skills. One thing I would like to remind everyone is the citations are looking different. None of the reviewers, nor Jody nor Brandy, are going to be checking every citation against, MLA and APA on OWL at Purdue to make sure everything is perfect. The goal is that there's a good faith effort to cite sources and avoid plagiarism. And a good faith effort, it demonstrates that students know that when they are using other people's ideas or words, they do need to credit, and they need to not copy word for word without crediting. And that is the really big lesson. I don't think, being deeply into APA right now with my doctorate and wanting to burn every APA manual that exists. I feel really good about the fact that students are getting that lesson. I mean, it's up to you as the teacher what you want to do, but the reviewers are not looking for perfection. And MLA or APA, it is up to you. You know, just a good faith effort. Writing rubrics. So the writing that is coming in has a rubric with it. And I saw a lot of different rubrics, but which is fine. You can create your own rubric. You can use one from a source. You can, you know, find one some people use that are connected with the Common Core. Some people have used rubrics from other programs or teachers. It just needs to match requirements and demonstrate clearly that the student met them. So for example, here, if we're talking about producing coherent writing, there's clearly the student is being evaluated on the introduction, the support and evidence, the overall organization, the word choice, the style, and the conclusion. So there is, you know, there's an attempt here to demonstrate that the student has at least met expectations. This is one example. Purdue OWL is awesome, but yeah, I'm tired of APA. Here's another example of a writing rubric. This is you know, a simplified writing rubric. The student either, you know, met the target or exceeded it or didn't. And here's an example of where there's space, where the teacher is actually providing some very specific evidence for the student. So we want to see evidence of evaluation that is connected. Let's take a look at language. And this is going to be a very quick peek, because in most portfolios, one piece of student writing is used to demonstrate mastery of both writing and language standards. So when the cover sheet comes in, it will often include the intended writing anchor, level E writing anchor, and then the level E language anchor. And most of the time, what people are demonstrating, or what people are having students demonstrate, is language anchor 1 or language anchor 2 about the conventions of standard English grammar. Not always, but a lot of the time. So one of the things that I thought was great about this piece of evidence is, yes, there's some explanation here. She organized the information to explain her point of view using the conventions of standard English. But in addition, this is just a piece of the rubric that accompanied it. The conventions of standard English, this aspect was actually built into the rubric, the overall rubric for the writing and the language. And I thought, oh, this is a way to kind of condense and kind of kill two birds with one stone. Be aware that if you do address other language anchors, you know, some of them, they're pretty extensive, and I am seeing some evidence where students are demonstrating multiple examples of sentence combining and using different phrasing, using different sentence structure, different things like that. And I love that. It is, you know, it's great. I think there are different ways that we can meet language standards, but this is commonly the most. Okay, so I didn't mean to say I didn't like Purdue OWL. I just, you know, we got some Purdue OWL fans, got it. But reading, we have to dive a little bit deeper in. When students need to demonstrate level E reading in ABE instruction, there's some things to know to submit the best evidence possible. And here is where, if it's been a while since you were through CCRS ELA foundations and you don't remember what a quantitative and a qualitative analysis is, this may be an area of review. But one piece that the reading evidence must include is a quantitative analysis. That's the number, the computer scored number that demonstrates that, note, it says informational text, that the informational text falls within a Lexile or ATOS range for level E. I put those ranges up there. And you need to include it in a place where reviewers can easily see it. This is an example. Some people just print out the results directly from ATOS or Lexile and include that. That's fine. You can also include it in other places, but you want to make sure reviewers can easily see it. The Lexile and the ATOS are for informational text. And this may be on text that you're using already. If you're using Newsy LA, Common Lit, or ReadWorks, the Lexile score is already there. And so you might be using material that already comes with a quantitative score, but you want to make sure that this is easily viewable. The second piece, oh, that's a great question. I'm gonna actually pause for a second, and Jody or reviewers, written pieces about career exploration.
I think that's a great question. I think in theory, yeah, I think the topic of a piece of writing is absolutely completely open. I don't think anything is off limits as long as it meets all of the requirements on the checklist and shows mastery of one level E writing standard. But I will say, I'm not sure I've ever seen a portfolio where, well, maybe, no, actually, maybe sometimes occasionally we've seen a writing sample that's about, oh, Stephanie maybe disagrees with me. Maybe I have seen some from portfolios in Stephanie's program. So yeah, short answer is yes, but it still has to meet all the requirements.
I remember earlier on, there was this exact type of essay. It was informative, and it was the student who wasn't sure if she wanted to be a dental hygienist or a dental assistant, and she wrote an informative essay kind of diving deep into a compare and contrast about those two positions to help her decide which one she wanted to be. And I just thought that was so relevant and just such a perfect way to combine the career exploration with the student writing. Great question. So then we have the qualitative analysis. The qualitative analysis needs to come in as well. And the qualitative analysis for informational text and literature, okay? Literature is not to be run through a quantitative analysis because these tools cannot adequately measure literature. You will get literature that comes in low, but it's actually very complex in terms of dialogue, vocabulary, themes, structure, all of those things. But the areas that we're looking for are background knowledge, purpose, text structure, language features, and graphics. Where are there some complexities? And I'm going to show you some examples. This can take different forms. Some of you might remember that rubric, that onerous rubric that we trained with the CCRS. We still use it, but we are finding some less onerous ways. For example, one program uses this rubric. I have used a version of this rubric, and it is simplified in the way that it's either complex or it's not. It's either accessible or it potentially could be complex. And this is actually probably like this is probably the shortest way to do this. And this is included with the evidence. This evidence also included the printout of the ATOS. This could be the 13.0, the ATOS level 13.0 could also have been written on this qualitative features, right at the top to put it all in one place. That's fine. And take a second here. This was a really good articulation of what the student did with that as far as reading evidence, that it's anchor one, read closely. And so read closely. There's a really good demonstration of what that meant. And that the student researched and supported the essay. This is tied with the student writing. So the reading, the research that student did to write the informative essay. The student went through the CRAP test, did some source summary and analysis. Some of this is included. Citation of specific evidence from the text is demonstrated, considering that the currency, the date and origin of the information. This is really a clear explanation of how the reading that the student did or at least one of the texts the student used really met this reading anchor of reading closely and citing specific evidence, explicit and for inferences. So that is an option as well. If a student is going to do all that reading and research for an informative or argumentative essay, you can create additional options or opportunities for a student to demonstrate reading. Here's another example of how the qualitative and quantitative analysis has come in, where the text level is there, and then just a brief summary. Now, remember that it takes you just a little bit of time to do this, but if you have tasks where multiple students are using the same text, then you can just, continue to include this with each portfolio. So this is just a brief summary. And again, anchor 1, citing strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says. This is a very common reading one, but reading closely usually means multiple reads through a text and really digging apart the layers of the text. And what the student did to demonstrate is answered text-dependent questions that were very specifically designed to elicit evidence and analysis on a text that fell into the level E range. Here's another example of a teacher who created a rubric to show qualitative analysis and also the ATOS score here, and just jotted a few ideas in where the texts were very or exceedingly complex. This was a really great option. These students looked at 2 speeches and they had to compare, they had to do a piece of writing. Not questions, but a piece of writing, although I think questions were also part of it to help the student develop ideas. But this is anchor 9, comparing texts. And the explanation was that the students read these 2 speeches, similar speakers, and different messages, and a little explanation about the complexity level. The other one, the Sojourner Truth, was not a level E, but the work that was done was complex, and the ideas of the text were complex. This is a great combination as well of social studies and reading. So it is an alternative. And I remember that when Stephanie first got into this work, she asked me, she said, does it always have to be a set of text-dependent questions to demonstrate reading? I said, no. Sometimes that it feels the most concrete to put together, but students can also do writing. But text-dependent questions that accompany the text, it needs to be in a student's words, but also with evidence. If reading anchor 1 is claimed, students have to cite strong and thorough textual evidence. The answers need to show evidence of thought and analysis. So make sure that students are fully answering those questions and demonstrating the level that they need of evidence and answer and analysis. Speaking and listening is our last one here. Student presentations are very common, but there are other ways too to demonstrate level E speaking and listening standards. And here is a great example of one where the student did a presentation, researched an infectious disease, presented it in class, and then there was like a question and answer where the students asked questions and the presenting student got to answer. The speaking and listening anchor 4 was the overall anchor, with level E being presenting information, findings, and supporting evidence clearly, making sure that it was appropriate to the audience, that the audience could follow. And the evidence given, there was actually a link to a video of the presentation. And then something that I thought was really very, very cool is the idea that if you're going to claim anchor 4 and part of this is audience, have the audience do some evaluation and include that. In addition to the teacher, there are some that have teacher, maybe the educational assistant, another staff member, and students, and a self-assessment. And one of the great things about students is students can be really, I mean, they don't always say it's great, it's great, it's great. They can offer some really good feedback that is really helpful to upload to show that, in fact, yes, audience was not only considered, but the audience also participated in reflection. Yep. We are, Judy, for sure. Also, TED Talks and note-taking and analysis guides. The thing about TED Talks is they're great, but students need to do a deep dive with them. If you're claiming evaluating a speaker's point of view, then there has to be evidence demonstrated that a student has considered the view, the reasoning, evidence, rhetoric, you know, the language and the reasons for word choice, the key ideas. So this is from a portfolio where students develop the skills of using a particular evaluation tool to evaluate the presentations, and they had a practice, and then they did one fully independently, and the rubric was uploaded, the notes, and the evaluation. So that was a little bit of a deep dive. And finally, here is a great example of students participated in a discussion, like a structured discussion, the speaking and listening anchor 1, collaborative conversation. It's more than just discussion. It is, you know, coming prepared, you know, communicating, you know, with each other, building on ideas, you know, disagreeing respectfully. So formal discussions, panel presentations, detailed evidence of participation, collaborative discussion. I thought this was great because there's an articulation here that the students had to prepare for participating in these conversations. They were given items from to research before the discussion, and then some information, a list of notable clips. That was helpful. There were a handful of clips saying this student built on another student's idea at this point, or this student asked a question of another panelist. And again, be very, very, very clear. So these are just examples of some things that are coming in, some ideas, what the evidence looks like. And we're going to do a breakout activity here. Lindsay.
Yeah, so before we do that, I just want to quickly show the where you can get the tasks. So for ELA, for math, science, and social studies, on the Atlas website, if you go to the resources tab and then go to the Adult Diploma HSC library, then you will open the library, and then here is the standard adult high school diploma with the plus. So if you click on that, it will open up a longer menu, and then you can find tasks for English language arts, math, science, social studies. So some examples there if you're interested. So wanted to bring that up, and then we're going to transition to a breakout group, and then you'll kind of maybe get to stretch and talk and all that. But I am going to just go to the actual document. You will get a link to this doc in just a minute. I'm just going to explain it first. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. What you're going to do, it's going to be a short breakout, like 10 minutes. You're going to look at the top left of your screen once you're in your breakout rooms, and you will find your Zoom room number, okay? And then you're going to click on the link in the table below that corresponds with your number. So if you're group 1, you'll click on this Jamboard. And then you're going to use Post-it notes or text boxes, whatever you're comfortable with in Jamboard, to comment on the evidence that you see. Those same 2 questions we've been talking about. What's strong? What could be improved? And so if I open up this just as an example, you will see this page. How you navigate to different pages is the arrow right here with this box that says 1 out of 9. You'll arrow. Oh my gosh, I just stopped sharing. And here we go. You'll arrow over, and then you'll get to different pages. So the math is on page 3. You can write sticky notes by clicking on this icon right here. And you can type things, this is strong because, and you can put it right over whatever you're talking about, or this could be improved, whatnot. The text box is down here. And then if you keep arrowing over, there is an ELA example. It is a PowerPoint that goes down. So that's the order. The arrow helps know the order to look at, and then a rubric. So that is all one piece of evidence. We just couldn't fit it on one page. But looking at a math and an ELA piece of evidence and commenting what's strong, what could be improved. So if you're in your breakout room and you can't open the Jamboard, come back to the main room and let me know. Otherwise, someone in your group can share their screen, and then you could do it that way as well. Okay, so I think I will pause the recording.
This meeting is being.
So I know that that was fast, but hopefully just having a chance to kind of look and at some evidence and come up with some strengths or areas of improvement was helpful. I am just going to, do you see my screen? I am hopefully sharing. Am I sharing? I am, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. For some reason, the green box went away. So, but I'm just going to highlight just a couple things that I was seeing going through. And so some strengths that you can see, one of the groups was talking about that there's clear scoring and that there's percent back at the top. And so there's clear student work. You can read it. It's legible. And yes, and I don't know, maybe the points were considered feedback. I don't see a lot of feedback on this one, and that's actually what some, oops, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. That's what some others were saying. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, like there's not a lot of teacher feedback. There are points, there's a percentage there, but there aren't points as far as like +2 out of how many, +1 out of how many. Another group said, well, this is slash, so does that mean that it's incorrect? So there could be some more clear feedback. And there is an example for a histogram, a dot plot, and a box plot on here. So that's each part of the standard. There was a question about, is it okay that this looks a little different and it's an example of a histogram, the student didn't create it, they're reading it, is that okay? And so they do have to interpret the data on the histogram, so it's included. And I know another person marked, are these conclusions really in depth or not, right? So these are all really good observations that then you can use when you're working with your students, like, oh, maybe let's work on this piece a little bit more or whatnot to get a little bit more in depth. And then teacher feedback, making sure you're including teacher feedback. Yes. Okay. So then the ELA, I have a few ELA ones. People saying citations could be incorporated. Good analysis needs more evidence. Good attempt at evidence, but needs specific reference. What study? So saying a study was done, it could be more specific and citing where. It's very organized. There's multiple ways to see the information. There's supporting detail. There's visuals. And then the last one, maybe including citations for photos would be helpful. So, and this was bigger. These were slides, but I like shrunk them to get them on a page. So it would have been more legible if you looked at the PowerPoint, but I couldn't include a link here. So anyways, any last comments, questions about this exercise? Was this helpful? Questions remaining? Maybe, yes, no. Nice to see real examples. Yeah. And if it wasn't, you can say that. You don't have to say it was helpful. But One last thing, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Jody, is that we do have a CCRS refresher webinar coming up. It is next week on October 12th, Wednesday, from 3 to 4:15 p.m. We did one this previous Wednesday, and we're repeating it. And it's just an opportunity to kind of refresh on the foundations, the shifts, the practices, some key resources, et cetera, when we're doing instruction, because CCRS is the foundation for the ELA and the math content that we're teaching for adult diploma. So you can register on the Atlas website. And I am going to turn this over to Jody.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Christine. I'm trying to share my screen again. Okay. Let's get myself situated here. Is everybody seeing my screen with the slides? Yes. All right. Great. So during breakout time, I was definitely reflecting on how this is the first time we have delivered this particular piece of training, and turns out we could have used all day to do it, but you know, we were being optimistic. So we are going to keep going. We are going to let you go at noon. We probably have more content than we can cover in that time. And I think what we will do is bump a little piece of it, or one piece of our content planned for today, to the working group meeting on October 17th, which I think will be okay. So just want to acknowledge that we are kind of flying the airplane, building the airplane all at the same time. So I'm really grateful for Christine and Lindsay for sharing their expertise about ELA and math. Using adult ed instruction as the completion option for ELA and math is probably sort of the most complex and detailed piece of the diploma process. So I think it makes sense that we spent a lot of time on that so far today. And now we're going to touch on a few other things that are somewhat less kind of detail oriented and complex. Oh, sorry, muted myself. At this point, we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about science and social studies. However, I just want to acknowledge we are not going to spend nearly as much time talking about science and social studies as we did ELA and math, for a couple of reasons. One, because they are just a little bit more straightforward, and a lot of the principles that we have already discussed in terms of what good evidence looks like apply to science and social studies as well. So you can, you know, use the same standards, or sort of the same guidelines that we've been talking about in ELA and math to apply to science and social studies evidence when you're using adult ed instruction as the completion option. However, the other thing I just want to point out is that what we have learned after, you know, a solid 5 years plus of programs submitting portfolios and students going through this, is that it does seem to be the case that for both science and social studies, high school credits are often a solid option. Hopefully, if you have a student who has a high school transcript, they probably have something on there that you can use for science and social studies. And the GED tests in science and social studies seem a little more universally accessible than the ELA or the RLA and math tests. So we do see fairly frequently that portfolios will often have high school credits and or GED tests as the completion option for science and social studies, more often than ELA and math. So we really encourage you, in terms of building an adult diploma portfolio, in terms of, you know, the level of evidence and the burden of proof on your part, it's going to be far lower if you are using high school credits and or GED tests in these areas. We know that I don't mean to imply that a GE test is easier for your student, but in terms of building the portfolio and the evidence that you need, it is more straightforward in that sense. However, all of that being said, if you are using adult ed instruction as the completion option for one or more areas in science or social studies, this list on this slide has the basic things that you need to remember and keep in mind. Just like with ELA and math, you need to include a course description document. You need to include the total number of instructional hours. Go ahead and estimate if you don't know exactly. You need to clearly state which competency is demonstrated in the student work. Note here, I am not saying level E because science and social studies do not align to CCRS. They align to K-12 standards. So level E isn't a relevant concept, but there are still competencies. So you just have to state which competency is demonstrated in the student work. Like with ELA and math, you need to add explanation of how that work shows mastery of competency, if there's any question at all, or just to make it really clear for reviewers. And again, we do recommend that you use this cover sheet, which can work for any area, any domain, and is specific to when you are using adult education instruction as the completion option. I want to, let's see, I want to back up and address a couple of questions that have come up so far. I know that someone asked in the chat about science standards and social studies standards. So just a review, just a reminder that the competencies for the standard adult diploma are what we are aligning to. They are what your students must receive instruction in, and they need to show mastery of one competency if you're using adult ed instruction as the completion option. For a reminder of what the competencies are for social studies and science, take a look at the competencies document that's in your participant folder. Those competencies were created by the original adult diploma working group around 2014, 2015. We know that science standards in terms of the K-12, the official Minnesota K-12 science standards have changed since then. They have been updated, they have been adopted. However, we have not yet had the chance to revise our adult diploma competencies to align with the new standards. And it's uncertain when exactly we'll be able to do that, hopefully in the upcoming years. But for now, there has been no official change in our adult diploma competencies, and those are still the competencies that we are using to guide instruction and to determine, to show mastery of in the portfolio. So hopefully that addresses that question. And then there was another question, a really good question in the participant questions document for today about using an online course like Apex or Edmentum, which I do know there's some science and social studies content in those online courses, and that some of those are approved for distance learning hours. So you might be using those with students either as a pure distance learning product or kind of a hybrid kind of a situation where they're doing some work from home and some work instructionally with you. That is great. Glad to hear you're doing that. So the question is, what evidence needs to be submitted if this is what you're using as an instructional tool? So what I will say is that for the adult diploma portfolio, we are not distinguishing what kind of instructional materials, what kind of resources, what kind of textbooks, what kind of tools you are using to deliver instruction. They could be classroom, they could be distance, they could be hybrid. If adult ed instruction is the completion option, you need to provide the same two things, or in some cases in ELA a little bit more, as Christine walked us through. But basically, you need to provide some kind of a course description that verifies that all the competencies are covered. If you're using an online product like Edmentum, maybe there's such a document within Edmentum that you could download and use, but I think actually more likely it's probably still you as the teacher who creates a course outline for your students and for use in the portfolio of what the scope and sequence of your course content is. So you need to include that course description document in the portfolio, and you need to include a piece of student produced evidence that clearly shows mastery of one competency. My experience is that those online instructional tools like distance learning products typically don't give students a sufficient opportunity to produce a piece of evidence that would pass in a portfolio, because they tend more towards multiple choice and things like that. Or it's not easy to print out what the student did and put it in a portfolio. So even if you use that as your instructional tool, you might still have to have your student do an additional task that clearly shows mastery, including sort of showing, you know, their train of thought and their understanding, not just a multiple choice test, and then put that piece of evidence into the portfolio. I'm going to pause for a second and look at what's going on in the chat. Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you, everybody who is, yeah, sort of affirming and adding details in the chat. Yeah, yep. So there are courses built in Edmentum that definitely align to adult diploma content, but yeah, don't consider them something that a student could necessarily just independently do and then they're finished. You know, there's still a role for you as an instructor. There's definitely a role for an advisor, and they may need to, you know, do some additional work to have a piece of evidence that would work for the portfolio. So, good question. All right, I'm going to keep going. We are going to move very quickly through social studies and science. I'm just going to give you one example. So in social studies, in the domain of social studies, in the area of US government, this is an example screenshot of one piece of student-produced evidence. If you look at if you look at the competencies document, I believe there's a competency, something about, you know, understanding the 3 branches of government. So this was an example of a piece, a part of student-produced evidence that was submitted to show competency. Again, I think you use the same, you know, ask yourself the same questions that you've been asking about ELA and math evidence, which is, you know, what is strong about this? What else would be useful? But I'm going to keep us going. For science evidence in the domain of science, one of the areas is physical science. Here is an example of a piece of evidence that was submitted for physical science. This aligns to the competency that is about motion, I think properties of motion or matter, something like that. A couple things, or let me open it up to you. What do you like about this evidence? What do you think could be improved? What do you notice? Do you think this is strong evidence? Any science teachers in the room? Yeah. There's a little more here than that social studies piece of evidence I just showed. Yep, I agree, Heather. Yeah, and this wasn't the entire, I just, you know, grabbed a screenshot out of the evidence. Yeah, I agree, Judy. I thought it was a good written explanation. Like, as a reviewer, I believe that the student understands what they are talking about. Here, yeah, diagrams would help. Yep. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's well written in the sense that I understand what the student is saying. Also, you know, again, this feels like a little bit petty that I'm saying this, but this is really nice in terms of I can actually read it, right? Like the scan is good quality. I guess the top answer a little bit better than the bottom, but yeah, it looks almost like, I almost suspect here in this answer that the teacher said, hey, please make sure that's going to be legible with a dark ink or something. And yes, Erin, I agree. One of the reasons we're I know Lindsay and Christine and myself, we are trying to show you examples of evidence that are not perfect, because perfect is not the standard here. But high quality and evidence of demonstration of understanding and clear thinking is what we are going for. Yes, Abby, thank you for pointing out. This was a question I had when I looked at this. So it says question 20 says 0.2, question 21 I think says, or 20 says +2, 21 says +3, but out of how many did they get full credit for this answer or partial credit? So like that would be helpful for me to understand. Yeah, and Amy, yep, these are open-ended questions, which is nice. It gives the student the opportunity to show what they know. It would be really good to see the scoring criteria for evaluating what that point value is, or just understanding whether the teacher sees this as a totally correct answer or a mostly correct answer or a partially correct answer. So just note to yourself as you are thinking, deciding what pieces of evidence to put in a portfolio, that your reviewers will be asking these questions about the way you have scored and given feedback, or the way the instructor has scored and given feedback. So yeah, thank you for that. Thanks for weighing in, everybody. So at this point, we are ready to wrap up. We've spent a lot of time today really talking about using adult ed instruction as the completion option in the portfolio. But I think that makes sense because, as I mentioned, the burden of proof is high. So that's why we spent, a couple hours working it through today. These are final reminders. Just remember, when you're using adult ed instruction in any area of the portfolio, remember to state which competency is being demonstrated. If it's ELA or math, the competency means the level E standard. If it's social studies or science, we're literally talking about the competency from the list of adult diploma competencies. Make sure then, basically tell us as reviewers, which specific skill is your student demonstrating mastery of? And then make sure that this piece of evidence clearly demonstrates mastery of that to someone who has never met your student, who doesn't know them, and who is not their teacher, right? Because that's who we are as reviewers. We recommend use the cover sheet as just a good way to organize and give us all the information that we need. And remember that you need to, in addition to that piece of student produced evidence that shows mastery of one competency, you also need to include the course description that shows us that you covered instruction of all of the required content. So we thought we would be earlier in the day at this point. We thought it might be time to take a break, but instead it's getting close to time to wrap up. So I am going to keep going, although I'll take a quick peek at the questions document to see. Yeah, I think we've covered most of the things there, and the one question I see there I will answer in a minute. So I'm going to keep us going. All right. From here, the good news is it gets a little bit easier. When we are talking about using high school credits as the completion option, there's still some work and some thought for you to do, but it's a little, hopefully, maybe less onerous than when you're using adult ed instruction. However, as I mentioned, we probably don't have enough time to get through all of our content today. So I am going to, for now, move past this chunk of content about using high school transcripts and high school credit. And we will talk about this at the Adult Diploma Working Group meeting on Monday, October 17th. And I think it will be, hopefully I assume that you all kind of have that on your radar already. There will be an email going out next week with the registration link for that. I do think that's something that all of us everybody in the working group can use a review and more practice on this. So I am just going to go ahead and move us through that section, and we will circle back to that soon. So I'm going to jump right here. Yeah, sorry. I don't mean to imply that analyzing transcripts is always easy. It's not. Yes, there's definitely a lot of wonkiness. But I guess what I mean to say is that we have less to do in terms of diving into specifics of what evidence should look like when you are using high school credits. But yeah, there's definitely a lot to know and think about in terms of how to know what you see on a transcript and how that can be used in the portfolio. And that's why I am thinking that that will be a great thing that we can continue talking about at the working group meeting on Monday. We have in past working group meetings talked about that. We can continue those discussions there. The working group will be at 1 o'clock on the 17th. And I do have a slide here towards the end that gives the times and dates for all of the working group for the rest of this year. But at this point, let's acknowledge that high school transcripts can be tricky and that we will continue talking more about that. Yes, and those working group meetings are always recorded. And in addition, we're recording this today. So we'll have all of these things to continue, working on and moving forward on together. So, but I think to end our time today, let's do like something that's actually easier than the other things we've been talking about so far. So yay for easy, right? I mean, relatively easy, I guess. So let's talk about assessments. In the adult diploma portfolio, by far and away the most common assessment that is used is GED tests. We see many portfolios where students have one or more GED tests as evidence in the portfolio. And also, just a quick thing to point out, students can have received a GED. They can pass all 4 GED assessments and get their GED diploma and still submit an adult diploma portfolio. And we occasionally get that scenario where a student says, in addition to having a GED, I would also like to have a high school diploma, because remember, the GED is an equivalency diploma, and this standard adult diploma is a high school diploma. So they're a little bit different, and students can hold both. So any student who has 1, 2, 3, or 4 past GED tests that they have successfully passed, they can use those as evidence in the portfolio. And this single document that you are looking here right here on this screen is the only piece of evidence that is necessary. You do not need to put a cover sheet. You don't need to give us any other explanation or anything. Give us this piece of paper. Tell us, which areas it's covering. In this case, it looks like this is being used for language arts, social studies, and science. Unfortunately, they didn't pass math, so it can't be used for math. But in terms of evidence for your adult diploma portfolio, GED tests are quite easy. I believe, and I'm pretty sure, yes, Christy, I agree. It's so nice when we see a portfolio and it's GED because it's so easy for the reviewers. This document that you're looking at right here, I believe, and I hope you all can confirm for me that this is a printout from GED Manager. Is that right? I think that is true. I know, so you as staff can have access to GED Manager, and then if your student gives you permission, you can see their My GED info. I'm looking for some of y'all to confirm that for me. That is not something that I do personally, so I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, but I believe that's true. And I will say the other thing that we do sometimes see in portfolios as evidence of GED just looks like this. This, I believe, is from the student's My GED account. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is my understanding, is that this one is from GED Manager, and this one is from, so like the staff account in GED Manager. And this, when it looks like this, that is often a printout from the student's My GED account.
Jody, it's looking, maybe Amy, you can unmute and chime in. I think Amy was saying that the first one also came from the student side account.
I was going to say, this is Brandy. So when the student shows their scores, that's how it will show in their GED account.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if you go into GED Manager as a instructor yourself, it'll be more of a line, like almost like an Excel spreadsheet. And within that line, you'll see scores and little emblems of pass or not.
Okay, yeah, maybe, yep. Yeah, so I guess I am not entirely sure. And so yeah, I think hopefully, Heather, I see that you maybe have a question about that, and I'm hoping that maybe reviewers or anybody else that has sort of expertise can maybe help Heather navigate to exactly where she needs to find. Maybe I am confused. Maybe there isn't a way in GED Manager to access this, and maybe you do need to work specifically with your student to get them to log into their account to be able to.
Can I jump in for a minute, Jody?
Yes, Amy.
You can in Manager. You can in Manager, you've got the place where you can go to manage students. And as long as the students in their account, in the student account, has chosen you as their test center, you'll be able to find that student in GED Manager. And then depending on how many practice tests they've taken, because the report is going to have, that you see there is going to have all of their practice tests and all of their official tests. So you can get a screenshot of that, or you can get the score report for each test in there. So if they pass social studies, you can go to the social studies score report that'll have their score on the top and the list of skills they need to work on. That report is usually multiple pages, and we only need the first page of that.
Right. I do think that's what this is then. I was maybe a little confused. And this is just a screen grab from a part of that document. Yeah, but I think what folks are saying is maybe that Heather, it probably does make sense for you to connect with your students and get them to go into their account, because it's going to look better. The printout they get from there is going to look better.
And Jody, if I can add, so if you have a student that adamantly says that they have a GED passed, but maybe they forgot their login information, and so you are not their GED program or their testing center, so you would not be able to find them, you can always send in the request and we could look for them for you. If a student says, I did pass the math or I did pass the social studies, but then you can't find it. So that's always an option too.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brandy. Yeah, which leads well into the next slide, which is to remember that in the standard adult diploma portfolio, you can also use the old GED tests. So we do see this once in a while. The old series was available from 2002 to 2013 or so. 2014 was when the new one came on board. So if you have students who passed one or more tests during that time period, they can use those in the portfolio. Sometimes that's trickier to get evidence of, but our office, the Department of Education, we do have official records of these 2002 tests. And as Brandy is pointing out, we also have records of the 2014 version tests. So if you need to, you can reach out to our office to get this score report. Tracy, yeah, I believe, okay, maybe again, I might need confirmation of this or help for sure. But yeah, I believe that the 2002 series test scores are not on GED Manager. So if you have a student who says that they passed those, but doesn't have any evidence of it, reach out to our office. You should send a message to the, one of my colleagues helped me remember what our team email inbox is.
I'll put it in there, Jody.
Yeah, thank you. So that should go to our generic team inbox with an inquiry, and we can get you this official score report, which you would then upload into the portfolio. So great. And then I just want to acknowledge GED is by far the most common assessment that we see in the portfolio, but there are others. And if you look at the completion options document, you will see that you'll see some others listed. We don't see them very often, but occasionally. So MCA is one we see sometimes. So that is usually on the high school transcript, or you might get some other documentation from the school district. An AccuPlacer score we see occasionally. So that's typically a score report from the college where they took that AccuPlacer. So basically, whenever you're using assessment, you just need some kind of official documentation from whatever entity administered that test. And just a heads up, because I know this question was on the question document. Yes, we are in the process of adding HiSET as an additional option. And we're going to talk more about that in the working group meeting on October 17th. So yeah, moving forward, HiSET will also be an option for completion in your adult diploma portfolio. All right, I'm going to keep us moving. You can stretch in 8 minutes when we're done. So I just want to acknowledge that so far today, we have been talking about evidence that mostly applies to the 4 academic areas, ELA, math, social studies, and science. And employability and career awareness is a little bit different, but it's pretty straightforward. So I just want to walk us through that quickly. Within the employability and career awareness domain, these are the 4 areas, just as a reminder. Oh, sorry, I thought I took out all my animation on these slides, so I apologize if that's uncomfortable for anybody. I'm just going to walk through these 4 areas quickly and outline what kind of evidence we require and what things we typically see in these employability areas. So first off, great news for the first area, which is self-management. You do not need any documents. The evidence of having completed self-management is making it all the way through the portfolio process, getting GED records and high school transcripts and doing adult ed instruction and all the work that your student is doing as a part of the process is self-management. You do not need to upload anything else or put any comments in the self-management area of the SID portfolio. The second area is developing a future pathway. This is where the resume goes. So remember that we said that every portfolio has to have a resume. You should upload it as a document into a PDF document into the developing a future pathway area. In addition to the resume, there should also be evidence of completion of those developing a future pathway competencies, which are the ACEs TIF competencies. This can look different. Sometimes it's a piece of student writing or a description, like Stephanie was talking about with her students, who she has them research a career and then they write about it and they use that both as their writing sample for writing evidence and as they're developing a future pathway evidence. That's awesome. Sometimes we see activities from MCIS, which is Minnesota Career Information System. Some of you are using that. It's like a career exploration program, or there might be some other online career exploration site that your students are working through. So there might be something there to print out. Occasionally we see high school credits. You might have a student who took like career exploration kind of course in high school, and then you can use high school credits. So that varies a little bit, but you definitely need the resume plus something additional. Yeah, and just a note about resumes. Again, resume is required in all portfolios, but as you've seen with a lot of the examples we've given so far today, it doesn't have to be flawless. It doesn't have to be like MBA level by any means. It doesn't have to have a ton of detail, but basically it should be appropriate for, whatever they have determined as their future pathway. Think about an entry-level job in that career pathway, and would this resume be appropriate for them to actually apply for a job? We want it to be real. We want it to be authentic. We don't want it to be just an exercise or a hoop that students jump through. But it's a benefit of going through this adult diploma process is if they didn't already have a resume, they will have one by the end. So not perfect, but yeah, is it appropriate for their career pathway? Yeah, thank you, Amy. A little bit of feedback on, yeah, if you use activities from MCIS, you'll probably, in addition, need to have the student do some reflection on the career goal. Does it match what their skills and interests are? Are they gonna earn enough money? Which those are the competencies in that area of developing a future pathway. Yeah, thanks, Amy. And then for navigating systems, this is, I mentioned at the front end that we don't often see applied in experiential learning. However, this is the area where it's most common because it does really vary. Navigating systems is really about, adulting, right? And so we do have students who have very different experiences that work for evidence in this area. We've seen things like a student talking about the process of getting a loan to buy a car. We've seen things like a student talking about getting their daughter an IEP in elementary school. We've seen things about navigating the benefit system, applying for Social Security disability and going through that system. So it can be a lot of things. Often this is, the mortgage process is another one of getting qualified for a mortgage, and then doing a search for a house, and then actually, going through the details of getting a mortgage. Yep, that's a good example as well. Sometimes we see employer evidence here. So some programs have used like a checklist or had the employer write a letter to confirm that the student is showing these competencies in their work setting. That's great. We love that. Sometimes it's a piece of student writing about, how they navigated the mortgage system, the student loan system, or whatever system they are navigating. So that typically is quite different in different portfolios, but we've seen some really cool and interesting things there. And then the last area in the portfolio is digital literacy. So the evidence for that area is quite straightforward. It is the certificate from North Star of having those 5 required North Star assessments. Most often we just see one certificate that lists all of them. But if you have separate certificates, that's fine too. 5 separate or a couple of separate certificates, that is fine too. Interesting question, Brian. Is being incarcerated evidence of navigating systems? They have gone through the judicial system, and each DOC facility has their own system of rules and regulations they must adhere to. Absolutely, being incarcerated is an experience of navigating systems. However, the simple fact that someone has been incarcerated is not sufficient to show evidence for the portfolio. The majority of portfolios that have been approved, the majority of adult diploma graduates in the state of Minnesota at this point are individuals who were incarcerated when their portfolio was submitted and approved. Often what we are seeing from those incarcerated students in their portfolios is in the navigating systems area is some piece of evidence of how they are navigating life as an incarcerated person, which could be, I know there's the KITE system, which is the way that incarcerated folks can make a request, like for example, a request to take the North Star assessment or something. We've also seen evidence of navigating systems for incarcerated folks be a letter written to the instructor or to somebody in authority advocating for themselves in some particular scenario. Denise, can their parole officer write a letter? Do they need to also write something? Okay, so evidence needs to be student produced, although I see where you're going in terms of possibly the parole officer could do the similar thing that we've seen, like an employer checklist. So yeah, I guess evidence, okay, so we are back to talking about navigating systems. So I'm going to go back there. Oops. Yeah, I mean, could this be somebody else besides an employer? Potentially, yeah. The key is somebody has to verify that the student has demonstrated the competencies within navigating systems. What that looks like, we don't, could look like lots of different things. Yeah, okay, so yeah, sounds like Lee has had an experience working with someone. I mean, definitely somebody who is on parole has to be navigating that system very carefully. So yeah, I think that's a great idea to have them document that and use that as evidence here. All right, so I need to keep us moving. We are out of time. Thank you for those good questions. Super quickly, we have resources available on the Atlas website. Some of them are behind a password. The password is MN Diploma, so that's important for you to know. Reach out to each other, communicate with each other on Mighty Networks. I hope you're already doing that. We have quarterly working group meetings. That's where you can keep updated and learn more and continue these discussions and know more people who are doing this work. This is the schedule for the upcoming working group meetings. The next one is on Monday, the 17th at 1 p.m. There will be an email going out early next week. Those emails go out from Neil in our office. So don't look for my email address. And it will have the registration link for that session. And we will dive more into analyzing transcripts at that session. So I apologize that we, kind of had to rush through things today, but I think we got through the most important stuff. I very much appreciate all of your engagement and all of your questions. I can hang on for a little while here if other people have things you want to talk more or ask more about. I will try to make sure that any questions that get asked in the participant question document get answered there, so you can check back there as well. Carla, I think you can go ahead and